What you just saw in China, that wasn't diplomacy. That wasn't strategy. You're watching this all wrong. This was the kowtow. And this outcome was decided before the plane ever left the ground. Hi, I'm Jake. This is Politics by Jake. This is the Weekend Show, Part 2, May 17th, 2026. Let me start here and let me say welcome to the show, welcome to the fight, welcome to 2026. There's a lot of stuff happening in a very short period of time, but I wanted to spend some time talking about the China trip. So let's start with that. Let me start here, because if you watch this the way most people are watching it, you're going to misunderstand it completely. You're going to see a meeting. You're going to see a trip. You're going to see a headline. You're going to see some video clips, some commentary, some reactions, and you're going to treat it like it's an event. It isn't. That's the mistake. This did not just happen. This was not decided in a room in Beijing. This was not shaped by a single conversation. This was not something that turned on a moment. This outcome was baked in. It was baked in before the plane ever left the ground. And if you don't understand that, you're always going to be behind the story, because you'll be reacting instead of understanding. And what we do here, what I do on this show is it's not reaction, it's structure. We're not going to do travelogue. We never do. We're not going to do who met who, what was said, what the press reported. Let the corrupt corporate media like the New York Times, but not only the New York Times, let them do that. That's not what this is. That's not what I do. This is upstream. We're going to look at what made this inevitable, what forces were already in motion, what pressures were already in place. Because once you see that, this stops being a big surprise. You stop being surprised, and that's power. It's power not to be surprised. It's power to know what's going on. That's why I do the show. Now, let's talk about what you saw, because the optics matter, and anyone who tells you they don't doesn't understand power. You saw the posture, you saw the tone, you saw the presentation, you saw what a lot of people, not incorrectly, have described as a kind of a submission, a kind of deference. And there's a word for it, and it's a known word. It's called the kowtow. And it's not a casual word. It's a very specific term. Historically, it referred to a ritual act of submission before the Chinese emperor. A physical act, not just a physical act. If that wasn't bad enough, a symbolic act, an acknowledgement of hierarchy, an acknowledgement of superiority. So when people use that word, they're not just describing body language. They're describing perceived position. And in geopolitics, perception is not separate from reality. It becomes reality. Because power, real power, is not just what you can do. It's what others believe you will do. It's what they think you're willing to do. We may talk about that later in the show. It's called the Thucydides trap. That's a very interesting thing. I don't know if we're going to get to it today, but we'll get to it in the clip. But I'll try to talk about it today. That's about what they think you are willing to do. It's what they think you are capable of doing. And once that perception shifts, everything downstream shifts with it. Markets shift, allies shift, adversaries shift. So when you see a moment like that, you don't dismiss it. You analyze it. But here's where people go wrong on this. They look at that moment and they ask, how did that happen? Why would that happen? What went wrong in that moment? These are the wrong questions. It's the wrong frame, because if you do that, if you say it like that, you're locked into treating it like an event. You're still treating it like an event. You're still treating it like something that changed in real time. And that's not what you're looking at. What you're looking at is the visible edge of a structure. Let me repeat that. Let me say that again so you get that, so you don't misunderstand. What you're looking at is the visible edge of a structure. Something that was already built. Something that was already in motion. Something that was already predetermined before anyone stepped off the plane. And if you don't train yourself to see that, you will chase events and travelogues and cultural and societal commentary, which is meaningless. You will chase those things forever. You'll react to headlines. You will ride the cycle. And you will never understand cause. Now think about this. If you know before a meeting happens what the incentives are, what the pressures are, what the motivations are, what the dependencies are, then the outcome is not going to be surprising. It's predictable. You know, not in every detail, but in direction. You're going to know, and that's what you're seeing here. You're seeing direction, a direction that was set long before the optics. Now, let's make this concrete, shall we? Because otherwise it stays abstract. You have a situation where access matters, deals matter, relationships matter, because this is a boardroom presidency. This is a businessman's presidency. The people of the United States are short shrift in this situation. That's why 16 businessmen went to China, and one of them had to actually charter a private jet because he couldn't get to Air Force One in time, had to charter a private jet while Air Force One was sitting on the tarmac in Alaska refueling in order to get on the plane. Because that's what this is. You see? Are you beginning to understand already? It's not hard. You have people around power who benefit from proximity to power. And that includes political actors, business actors, institutional donors. And when those forces align, they don't suddenly change, in a meeting. They express themselves. And that expression is what you saw. So when people say, why did it look like that? The answer is because it was always going to look like that. Given the inputs, the outputs, they were predictable. You heard the saying, garbage in, garbage out. That's kind of an example of a predictable input and output. Now, that doesn't mean inevitable in a fatalistic sense, but it does mean structurally determined. And that's the difference between watching something and understanding it. And if you understand that, you're already ahead of 90% of the analysis that you're hearing, because most of what you're hearing, it's reaction, it's emotion, it's surface, it's not structure. So let's reset, okay? You saw the moment, you saw the optics, you saw what people are calling submission, and yeah, it was not good. But that moment was not the story. That moment, that was the result. But here's where it gets even more interesting. Because while you're watching that, you're also being told something else. You're being told that China is strong. And with that, we'll take a break. This is Politics by Jake. Welcome to the show. We'll be right back. Hi, this is Jake with Twain Consulting. Let's be blunt, shall we? America is litigious. It's unstable, and it's financially weaponized. If your name is on everything you own, you're a sitting duck. At Twain Consulting, we help you vanish legally, ethically, and permanently. From land trusts to layered LLCs, we teach you how to restructure your assets so the predators can't see them and can't touch them. This isn't a loophole. It's a strategy that the wealthy have used for decades. Isn't it time you got the same protection? Call Twain Consulting at 805-380-5699 or visit us online. Protect what's yours before someone else claims it. And this is Politics by Jake. Welcome back. You're being told constantly some things about China. You're being told that, China is strong, and that China, and stay with me now. You may say, wait, Jake, wait. What do you mean China's not strong? China's obviously, just stay with me. You're being told constantly that China is strong, that China is ascendant, that China is disciplined, that China is unified, that China is the future. That's the narrative. You hear it from the press, you hear it from policy circles, you hear it from commentators. These are all people who should know better. But again, and sometimes do, But again, this is the problem with the corporate, corrupt, controlled, I want to say on the take. It's not that much that they're on the take, is that they're terrified. Just like all of the people who allow themselves to fall within the ambit of Donald Trump, because Donald Trump is a man of chaos. Donald Trump is a destroyer. Everything that Donald Trump touches dies. That's what I mean. And the press is not taking the high road. Sorry, they're not. So these are people who should know better. And sometimes they do, but they repeat it anyway. And like most narratives, it contains just enough truth to make it believable. Okay, now I'm going to switch the narrative, but I'm going to qualify it. China is powerful. China has scale. It has manufacturing capacity. It has state control. It has the ability to mobilize resources. All of that is true. But that's not the question. The question is not, does China have power? The question really is China stable? Because those are not the same thing. Power and stability are not interchangeable. You can have power without stability. You cannot have long-term strength without stability. And when you start looking at China through that lens, stability, the picture changes very quickly. So let's take it piece by piece, shall we? Let's start with the economy, because that's where a lot of the solution lives. You have an economy that for years, was built on debt. It was built on construction projects that were, some of which were torn down and destroyed because they were empty, because no one ever bought anything. Expansion, growth at any cost. Real estate becomes the engine. Projects get built. And this is what I was saying. Projects got built not because they were needed, but because they drive growth metrics. I mean, you may say, now, hold on a minute, Jake. No, I know. Kitchen table economics, it's not. But this is the big boys, and it drives growth metrics. Entire cities were constructed, they were populated on paper, but not in reality. And eventually they were destroyed. That's not strength. That's distortion. And eventually distortion has a cost. And I mean, you've seen it. Major developers collapsing. Well, maybe I haven't seen it, but I'm telling you. Major developers collapsing. Massive over leverage. Projects that, as I just mentioned, can't sustain themselves. Completely empty construction projects. Beautiful high-rise tenements. They have to be razed. They have to be destroyed because no one's buying. And when all that starts to unwind, it doesn't unwind cleanly because it's not just economic. It's political. That system is tied to local governments, employment, perception of success. So now you don't just have an economic issue, you have a credibility issue. And credibility is fragile. Now, let's move to demographics, shall we? Because this is slower, but it's more dangerous. You have in China, mainland China, an aging population. You have a shrinking workforce. You have fewer young people coming in to support a larger, older population that's living longer. That's not theoretical. That's math. And math doesn't negotiate. You can't decree your way out of it. The Emperor Xi decrees. You can't do it. You can't manage perception out of it. You can't propaganda your way out of it. You just can't. Over time, that pressure builds, and it builds quietly until it isn't quiet anymore. Now, layer on top of that, okay, youth unemployment. Young people, definitely educated, definitely connected, definitely aware, unable to find stable opportunity. And that's a problem, not just economically, but politically, because young populations without pathways become unpredictable populations, and unpredictable populations make governments like the Chinese government nervous. Now we get to the most telling piece: internal behavior. What does the system do when it's under these kinds of pressures? That tells you everything. And what you're seeing is control tightening, leadership changes, removals, disappearances, reassignments, purges. Now understand something. Every system removes people. That's not unusual. That in itself is not particularly noteworthy. That's kind of standard operating procedure. But frequency of the removal of people, that does matter. Patterns matter. Intensity of how it's done matters. And when you see repeated, visible, high-level purges, gosh, I wish I could get into this more. All right, the heck with it anyway. When you see repeated, visible, high-level purges, you're not looking at confidence. You're looking at insecurity managing itself. Let me give you a rule on this, okay? And it's a good rule. You can use this anywhere. Strong systems do not have to purge themselves constantly. They don't have to. They don't need to, because stability does not require fear. Instability does. And when fear becomes a tool of governance, that tells you something about the underlying condition. Now, let's bring this together, shall we? You have economic distortion, demographic pressure, you have youth instability, you have internal security. That's not a picture of clean strength. That's a picture of managed tension. Now, again, this doesn't mean China is weak in the sense that it can't act. It can act. It can project power. It's doing that in the South China Sea all the time. It can exert influence. It can absolutely shape outcomes. But it nevertheless means something critical, that the image is not really the reality. And when the image and the reality diverge, you get behavior that doesn't match the narrative. You get signals that confuse people because they're still operating on the narrative, not the structure. And this brings us back to what you saw on this abortion of a trip to China. Because if you believe that China is an unstoppable, unified, confident system, then what you saw looks like submission, looks like weakness, looks like imbalance. But if you understand that beneath that image, there is pressure, there is instability, there is roiling insecurity, then what you saw can start to make more sense, because now you're not just looking at one side of the table. You're looking at both. And once you do that, the question can change. And you can ask a good question. It's no longer, why did that look like submission? Now it becomes, what was actually being negotiated underneath all that? And that's where this turns. Because once you ask that question, you stop looking at the ideology, you stop looking at strategy in the abstract, and you start looking at something much simpler. And this is Politics by Jake. We'll take a break and we'll be back. And now here's a word from one of our sponsors, Twain Consulting.
Hi, this is Jake with Twain Consulting. Imagine, if you will, having the power to disappear from the prying eyes of creditors, identity thieves, nosy strangers, all while protecting what you've worked so hard to build. That's what virtual invisibility offers. It's not magic. It's smart legal and business strategy to shield your assets and privacy so you can live free, confident, and in control. Most people think that asset protection is only for the ultra-wealthy, but it's for anyone who wants peace of mind and financial security, including you. Don't wait until it's too late. Take control now. Call me at 213-465-0639 or go to facebook.com/Twain Consulting to learn how virtual invisibility can protect you and your family, because when you're invisible to risk, you're unstoppable. Now let's get back to Jake and Politics by Jake.
And this is Politics by Jake, and we are back. Welcome to the show. So now you have the first two pieces, okay? You have what you saw, the optics. You have what's underneath, smoke and mirrors. You have what's underneath, which is the reality. And now we get to the part that people resist the most because it's too simple. It doesn't sound sophisticated. It doesn't sound strategic. It doesn't sound like the kind of thing that explains global events, but it does. And this part, this is not about genius. This is not about some grand geopolitical design that is being executed flawlessly across continents. It's not about a master strategy. This is about something that I've talked about before on this show with regard to the curse on this nation that is Donald Trump. Appetite, greed, access, prestige, proximity. That's enough. That has always been enough. And I don't mean that in a good way. It means like enough already. But if you don't believe that, you haven't studied how power actually operates, because what you get over and over again is a layer of people around power who are not there because of principle. And you may think that these are no accounts. I've described them as palace courtiers. I've described them as hangers-on. I've described them as office seekers. I've used several things, several words and phrases to describe them. This is that layer. And they're not there because of principle. They're not there to serve the people of the government, of the people of the United States of America. They're there for a very crass and low reason. They're there because of opportunity. They're there because of access. They're there because they want something. And that something can be very simple. It can be a deal. It can be a contract. It can be a position. It can be an introduction. Yeah, just an introduction. It can be a relationship. And once that becomes the driving force, everything shifts. Now, let me make a distinction here, okay, while we're talking about this, because it matters. There are two systems operating at the same time. There is the political system, and then there is the access system. The political system, in theory, operates on national interest, strategy, security, long-term positioning. And that's what it's supposed to do. But the access system, well, that operates on something very different. It operates on proximity to power. And what that means is who gets in the room, who gets the meeting, who gets the call return, who gets the opportunity. Just like that guy, it's become a joke. The guy who missed the flight had to charter a plane because being in that room was so important that it was worth chartering a plane to fly up to Alaska and meet Air Force One there. And when the access system, though, starts to dominate and override the political system, you get an aberration. You don't get diplomacy anymore. You get something else. You get negotiation that looks like diplomacy, but behaves like business. Short-term, transactional, opportunity-driven. Now, think about what you saw, okay, leading into that meeting. You had business interests. 16 big businessmen on the plane. Well, 15 and one that caught up in Alaska. 16 when they got there, I guess. You had business interests. You had major players, people with enormous financial stakes. They're all trying to be near this process because they know that Donald Trump is this. Like I always describe on the show almost every week now, because I'm trying to convey to you who this guy really is, where he said, all I knew at a campaign rally is that from the very earliest that I could remember, I had to get, and he made this motion with his hands, I had to get everything I could get. I had to get everything I could get. Well, it's a somewhat of a conjecture, okay? But you could say that these 16 businessmen understood that part about Donald Trump very well because they're the same way. And that's kind of why you've heard me say that the seeking of wealth is kind of a sickness in and of itself. I'm reminded about Crassus of Rome, who was the richest man in the Rome, and some of the things that he did. We won't talk about that on the show, but he had this sickness, and he did awful things. But these people who have this sickness, okay, Jake, maybe it's not a sickness. I don't know. They're trying to be near this process, is what I'm saying. They're trying to be a part of it. They're trying to align themselves with it, okay? And when CEOs are chasing the plane, you already know what the meeting is about. I mean, that's the tip-off. You already know. Because serious statecraft doesn't look like that. It doesn't require that kind of behavior. And so when you look at that behavior tells you something. It tells you this is not purely political. This is not purely strategic. This is something else. Now, again, you can say, well, that's what businessmen do after all. And I say, yeah, that's true, correct. That's exactly what businessmen do. They seek advantage. They seek opportunity. They seek return. And as I've said, after having said that the seeking of wealth is a sickness, for the sake of the argument, okay, without getting into the moral and ethical aspects of it, let's just say that there's nothing wrong with that if it's kept in its proper place. All right? But here's the problem. Government is not supposed to act this way. Government is supposed to restrain that. Government is supposed to filter that. Government is supposed to take all of those pressures and subordinate them to something higher, to structure to continuity, to long-term interest, to the interest and the protection and prosperity and safety and welfare of the people of the United States of America and our allies. And by derivation, the people of the world. Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm an American. I'm pro-America because I believe in the principles. And I think a lot of you do who watch this show. And I think a lot of Americans who ought to be watching this show, but are not, will get you. I think they believe in it too. That's not what you were seeing here. And when it doesn't act like that, when it can't, when it becomes captured by those same appetites, then policy starts to change. And it doesn't change loudly. It changes quietly. It changes in tone. It changes in emphasis. It changes in what gets prioritized and what gets deferred, what gets swept aside, what gets kicked to the curb. And over time, those small changes add up. Because now you're not asking what is the long-term interest or what is in the long-term interest. You're not asking that at all. You're asking what is available right now. What can be gained right now? What can be secured right now? What can I get of all I can get? What can I do? Do you see? Do you see what I'm saying? And that's a completely different frame. And that's always been the problem with Trump, even in the office of so much as a dog catcher, a county dog catcher. Because he doesn't have the idea of service. It doesn't mean anything to them. All he cares about is himself. All he cares about is himself. All he cares about is himself and how he can feather his own nest. The ideas of the Constitution, the ideas of service to the people, these are foreign to him. He uses them. He pretends to believe in these things, but I assure you, he does not. And this is one of the causes of great concern. What he's doing is a completely different frame. It's a transactional frame. And transactional, and that's a mild word for it, but let's call it that. Let's call it transactional. And transactional thinking does not produce strategic outcomes. It produces short-term wins at long-term costs. Okay? Now, bring that back to what you saw this past week in that abortion of a trip, because this is where it connects. If you understand that the system around that meeting is influenced by access, by proximity, by opportunity, and by appetite, then the outcome stops being confusing and you can understand it because it stops being surprising. Because now you're not looking at states interacting in the abstract, you're looking at people operating within incentives. And incentives, drive behavior. They do it every time. So now the question is not, what did that look like submission? Why did that look like submission? The question becomes, what was being pursued that made that acceptable? And once you ask that, you're in a completely different level of analysis. And that brings us to the final piece in this particular segment. Because once you understand the drivers, you have to ask, what does that cost? And that's my concern. And this is Politics by Jake, and we'll be back in a moment. And now here's a word from one of our sponsors, Twain Consulting.
Hi, this is Jake with Twain Consulting. Let's be blunt, shall we? America is litigious. It's unstable, and it's financially weaponized. If your name is on everything you own, you're a sitting duck. At Twain Consulting, we help you vanish legally, ethically, and permanently. From land trusts to layered LLCs, we teach you how to restructure your assets so the predators can't see them and can't touch them. This isn't a loophole. It's a strategy that the wealthy have used for decades. Isn't it time you got the same protection? Call Twain Consulting at 805-380-5699 or visit us online. Protect what's yours before someone else claims it. And now let's get back to Jake and Politics by Jake.
And this is Politics by Jake, and we are back. Now, all right, let's stop talking in the abstract, because this is where people start to lose the thread. We've talked about what you saw, what's underneath, what's driving it. So now we have to answer the only question that matters. And that is what actually gets traded. Not theoretically, not philosophically, but concretely. And that really matters, because nothing like this is free. Nothing. This is all pay to play. When you move from principles of service to the people of the world, to the United States, the republic for which it stands, and our allies, which, as I said in the last segment, Donald Trump just, it's like in The Godfather, when Michael says, with regard to people who serve their country in the military, they're suckers. That's what Donald Trump thinks. Remember when he visited Normandy and he visited the graveyard? He thought those guys were suckers. That was his first administration. This is the way he is, guys. Okay. Anyway, so when you move from principle to transaction, you don't eliminate cost, you relocate it. And that's key. You don't get something for nothing. You get something now, and you pay later. So now, let's slow this down, shall we? Because this is where people miss it. They're looking for a treaty, a document, a statement, something obvious. But that's not how this works. You don't wake up one morning and say, "We have now changed our position." That's not how this kind of power operates. Power moves through signals, small signals, subtle signals, tone, language, body position, what you want to emphasize, what you don't emphasize, what you respond to, what you ignore. That's where the movement is, see? Now, take something real, okay? Take Taiwan. Take the Republic of China. Call it what it is, a functioning system, aligned with us economically, aligned with us strategically. Now, do you need to sell it out in a speech? No. You don't need a speech, but look closely. You don't need a declaration, but look carefully. All you need is hesitation. Hesitation can be enough. Ambiguity can be enough. A shift in tone can be enough. Because once that signal goes out, and believe me, people are watching all of this. Once that signal goes out, everybody sees it. Everybody sees it. And this is the part that people don't understand. They think, well, nothing official happened. Wrong. Everything unofficial happened. And the markets see it, and the allies see it, and the adversaries see it. And they don't wait. They adjust. They adjust immediately. Let me give you the sequence, okay? Because this is how it actually unfolds. First, there's a signal. Then, there's an interpretation. Then, there's an adjustment. And by the time you get to adjustment, the position has already changed. No announcement required. Now, expand that, okay? Because it's not just Taiwan. It's credibility. And credibility is not a talking point. Credibility is a currency. You either have it or you don't. And once it starts to erode, you don't feel it right away. You don't, everything looks normal, you know. Meetings still happen. Statements still get made. Press still reports things. But underneath, in the underlayment, the calculation changes. The allies start asking, can we rely on this? Can we rely on this? And they're doing a lot of asking of that already. But they're looking at this and they're saying, can we rely on this? Adversaries also look at this and they start asking, how far can we push this? And those are very different questions than they were asking before. Now, let me take you one step further on this because this is where it becomes structural. You don't lose position dramatically. You don't. There's no moment where everything collapses. That's Hollywood. That's not reality. You lose it incrementally. You lose it piece by piece, signal by signal, deal by deal. And the reason you don't see it is because, well, there are a couple of reasons. First of all, most of us are struggling, kicking and paddling and flailing about, trying to keep our nostrils above the economic waterline. That's one reason. But another reason you don't, and we don't have time to look at that stuff. We just don't. But the other reason you don't see it is because each individual move looks reasonable. It looks defensible. It looks explainable. And often there is some sort of standard operating explanation. You can always justify it. You can always say, well, under the circumstances, and like we don't necessarily know the circumstances, so this guy who's supposed to know says under the circumstances. You can always construct an argument is the point. And that's what, honestly, that's what makes it dangerous, because now you're not making one bad decision. You're making a series of decisions, each of which seems rational in isolation, sure, but collectively, you know, they move you. Now bring it back, okay? Because this is where it connects directly to what you saw. If what's driving this is access, is proximity, if what's driving this, you know, is appetite, then the question becomes, what are you willing to trade to satisfy it? And the answer, almost always, more than you realize. Now, here's the part I want you to sit with, okay? Because actually, this is the part that really matters. You don't sit down and say, I'm going to give this away. That's not how that happens. You sit down and say, this is a good deal. This makes sense. This is beneficial. And maybe it is in the short term. But over time, what you may actually be doing, and believe me, this matters when it comes to Donald Trump and those 16 businessmen on the plane, what you actually may be doing is exchanging position for access, exchanging leverage for opportunity, exchanging structure for transaction. I mean, once you do that enough times, you don't notice the loss. It's already occurred. Because you didn't lose anything. You traded it. And once you understand that, you're ready for the last question. Not what happened, and it's not why it happened. It's what happens next. And this is Politics by Jake.
And now here's a word from one of our sponsors, Twain Consulting. Hi, this is Jake with Twain Consulting. Imagine, if you will, having the power to disappear from the prying eyes of creditors, identity thieves, nosy strangers, all while protecting what you've worked so hard to build. That's what virtual invisibility offers. It's not magic. It's smart legal and business strategy to shield your assets and privacy so you can live free, confident, and in control. Most people think that asset protection is only for the ultra-wealthy, but it's for anyone who wants peace of mind and financial security, including you. Don't wait until it's too late. Take control now. Call me at 213-465-0639 or go to facebook.com/Twain Consulting to learn how virtual invisibility can protect you and your family, because when you're invisible to risk, you're unstoppable. And now let's get back to Jake and Politics by Jake.
And this is Politics by Jake, and we're back. Welcome. Let me leave you in closing, okay, with this. Because once you see this particular thing that I'm about to say, you can't unsee it. What you watched this past week was not a mistake. It wasn't a one-off. It wasn't something that just happened, because of personality or circumstance or timing, which would be very tempting to say that it did. Very tempting. No, it was the expression of a structure, and that matters. Because if it's structural, it doesn't fix itself. It takes human beings to do that. It doesn't correct automatically. It takes human beings to do that. It doesn't reverse just because people notice it. It continues until something interrupts it. And that could be something other than a human being. Now, that doesn't mean collapse tomorrow, It doesn't mean crisis next week. It means something quieter than that, something slower than that. It means direction, okay? And once a system has direction, it tends to follow it. No, not perfectly, not cleanly, but consistently. So the real question is not what happened. You've already seen that. The real question is this: do we recognize the direction we're going? Because if you do, you have a chance to think differently, to act differently, to position yourself differently. And if you don't, you drift with it, just like everyone else. And that's the difference. And this is Politics by Jake. This has been the Weekend Shows. Have a good week. We'll see you next weekend. Bye-bye now.